We've had 1,500 speakers at the Inside Edge over 33 years. Isn't that incredible when you think about that? And as I look at you all, I'm just so filled with joy to be talking about this subject today, because not one of those speakers has ever spoken on this subject. And haven't we had amazing lives when you think about it? Our childhood, in a couple of generations, there will be nobody alive who remembers the days that we grew up in. Our life was so different then, too, wasn't it? I mean, it was so much simpler. Oh, my goodness. I remember this big black telephone that had a rotary dial, and you had to sit. It's the only way you'd ever hear from anybody was on that telephone. I mean, things have changed completely. And our lives now are so complex. We have our phones on our wrists and in our pockets, and so much distraction, so much coming in all the time, that we get mired in the mundane. And being so filled with all the things we're supposed to be doing and doing it instantly, we forget that there is a whole lot of meaning that we've gathered over the years. And Stephen Covey says, there are certain things that are fundamental to human fulfillment. And the essence of that is summed up in 4 words: to live, to love, to learn, and to leave a legacy. And we give that very little thought. But it is the richest possible place that we can dig for treasure in our lives. And so I want to inspire you. My purpose this morning is to motivate you to memorialize at least one very meaningful moment in your life. And we're going to do, and the reasons to do this are that the payoff is absolutely amazing. When you begin to look at your life and the meaning of it, now the meaning and the purpose are 2 very different things. There are undiscovered treasures there that will actually end up giving you a sense that your life actually made sense. And I'll get to that in a little bit more. So I'm thinking back on my own childhood. I grew up in Beverly Hills in the 40s and early 50s. It was a really fun time to grow up. Beverly Hills was a completely different place. It was a very small town, really charming little town. My best friend Alice and I, we met when we were 3. We would walk to the movies, and Rodeo Drive, now you just have to picture this. You won't even believe it probably. Rodeo Drive was a secondary drive to Beverly Drive. And on those 2 streets, there were some very interesting things. There was a Will Wright's ice cream parlor. There was a Lerner's, which was like a dress shop, Modo Day. Do you remember that name? There was a pet shop. And over on Rodeo Drive, which you had to walk a whole half block over to get to, there was the gramophone shop, and it had little booths, and you would go stand in these booths and listen to the 45 records. So that was what the town was like. And you did see a lot of movie stars, but that's the way it was. And the things that went on there and the memories that I have of those times, I remember in my basement, my parents there was a box of their kind of memories, and they were like faded photographs. Some of them had names on the back of the photographs. There weren't any videos yet. That didn't exist. And my mother made these stereo realist slides from our Grand Canyon trip that you could see it in 3D, but I mean, these things were very, very cumbersome. So those things really were not taken care of. You know, the love letters, the photographs, the desperate notes were all in a box, and nobody ever did anything with them, and then they got thrown away. None of our scrapbooks have survived from those days. So that's the way it was then. And So I remember, too, that we used to watch, we used to read the morning funnies, the Sunday morning funnies. And I remember a particular cartoon that my family started talking about. And in this cartoon, there was a picture, a drawing of a man who had climbed a mountain to ask a wise man, what is the meaning of life? And this particular question cracked them up, because how do you ever answer a question like, what is the meaning of life? It was absurd, really, wasn't it? But this particular question has been asked over and over again, and I have spent many years, especially recently, thinking about what has been the meaning of life. And that cartoon also evolved, because I remember one of Snoopy sitting on his doghouse with his typewriter, and he was writing, what's it all about? What is the meaning of life? And so the other day I was thinking, okay, how has this cartoon continued to evolve? And I went to Google, of course, and put in meaning of life cartoons. And there were hundreds of them, maybe thousands of them, actually. And the most recent ones are of a man climbing a mountain, sitting in front of a wise man and saying, what is the meaning of life? And the guru says, my computer's down, just Google it. It cracks me up. So the meaning of life is a very valuable territory for us to explore. And I really think for myself that I've identified it, and I'll be sharing that with you. And I remember a morning that it started. It was about the third year into the Inside Edge, and we were meeting at the Beverly Hills Hotel. And there was a very big, beautiful pink room. We had 200 people there. There were also chapters in Orange County and in San Diego. But I remember one morning when I got up and announced that our speaker was going to be a poet the next week. And there was a look on people's faces that was like, huh? What does this mean? Picture the people in the room. It's 1988. Some of the people there are very famous today, but they had never even written books. They'd never even explored their true potential yet. And they were there to explore their true potential. There was Jack Canfield, never written a book yet. Mark Victor Hansen, Dr. Susan Jeffers, who wrote Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. And Brooke Cross was there from the very first meeting. He remembers that we were all just juicy with the excitement about what we were going to be able to achieve in our lives. We were just going for it. We were going to do anything. Michael remembers. That was the energy of the Inside Edge in those days. Our whole lives were ahead of us, and it was just so exciting. So why did Diana book a poet? You'll laugh when you hear who it was and the effect that he had. So the next week, there were not all that many people in the room, I have to admit. People were not jumping up and down to hear a poet. But anyway, that morning, our speaker was David White. And if you know who David White is, I believe he was just paid $35,000 by Xerox or somebody like that to speak, one-for-one speech. He's a fabulous Welshman with a beautiful voice, and he does his own poetry, and then he recites other people's poetry, and he just mesmerizes a room. And he mesmerized me that day because he did a quote from a poem by Mary Oliver that was called The Wild Geese. And in thinking of serendipity this morning, Ted and I got out of the car, and we heard this strange, strange sound this morning. And what is that? I thought maybe somebody's radio, or who knew? Wild geese flying. About 5 wild geese flew over the Pacific Club this morning. There's been a lot of magical moments in my life, as you probably know, and that was just another sign. But anyway, the wild geese, this is the way the poem goes. You do not have to be good. You do not have to crawl on your knees for 100 miles through the desert, repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. And I remember those words went through me like an arrow through my heart. And there was an audible gasp in the room. I had no idea what those words meant, but I knew they were true. And I've come to find that they truly are true. Because when people think about leaving a legacy, they probably are thinking of somebody like Lincoln and people like that this morning. But every one of us leaves a legacy in so many ways. I'm thinking of my own grandmother, who ran a boarding house near Bullock's, Wilshire in downtown Los Angeles. Her husband didn't work. He was deaf, and he was a photographer. I guess he did work, but I mean, she was the major money earner. So she had a boarding house, and she made all the curtains, and she loved to sew, and she loved to cook. And I remember this giant table in the kitchen where the boarders would all sit around, and she would cook for them. So do you see there's some kind of an effect on me there? Gathering people around tables and cooking, and she had an ability to sew, and she could look at anything and copy it. And my mother was very beautiful, and she worked for a woman named Mrs. Goodrich, who had a salon across the street from Bullock's, Wilshire. Mrs. Goodrich, in those days, would go to Paris and buy the couture fashions. So that was no easy journey in those days, as you can imagine. And my mother would model those things, and Mrs. Goodrich was very kind, and she would let my mother take them home overnight so that my mother could actually copy them for her. And so I learned to sew before I learned to cook, and I used to teach sewing before I taught cooking. So that influence from my grandmother is very, very powerful in my life, and all that I have of her is one faded photograph. I would love to be able to hear from her how she felt about the beauty that she created or why she did what she did. It would mean the world to me. And it has gone on in the Inside Edge, her influence. We have a slide. Can we put that slide on? Thanks, Michael. Thank you, Victoria, for sharing this slide with me. I always wanted to chronicle the family history with my mother, but I wasn't forceful and I didn't make it happen. That's one regret I have. Thank you. So we don't have to be famous and we don't have to be a world changer to have a legacy. And I know that in everybody's life, everybody in this room, when they dig for the gold of their life, they're really going to see what it was. So I've had ways of trying to preserve legacy. I took a lot of years of journal writing, and I wrote a lot, but I really was just writing for myself. And it was very important to me to delve into lots of questions. And out of those journals came the Inside Edge. What can I do? How can I use my talents and my gifts to create something in this world that makes it a better world? And Paul and I followed our noses and went places and joined something called Impact, where we met people like Jack Canfield and so on. So we had that network. And we were invited to go to the Soviet Union, as you know. And then that's where the Inside Edge came from. When we saw that people really began to share resources as they sat around traveling and talking and doing work together, that their lives expanded. And so then that's what came out of the journaling. Those journals I really can't leave particularly. They're just rambling. There's probably 10 volumes this thick of handwritten journals. So that's not a legacy that I can pass on. But then there came a time when I decided that I would do something, and I think I invented this actually. This is my very first one. This is something that I've called an illuminated journal. And I bought lined books like this. So Larry, will you hold this for a second up for me so I can just talk? This is something that I started writing in, and I started gluing into it little souvenirs. And in those days, it was a time when we had printers. We could take pictures, and then we could print them out on our printers at home. And I decided to use very, very thin paper so that I could put some of these things in. And I began to write about the things in my life that I loved, that I was just keeping a journal that had all sorts of crazy things. Here's a store window in Tahiti. Here's Ted with our first grandchild. And as I look through here, and it has all my written thoughts in here too. So if I learned a poem or I saw a poem that I wanted to do, so there are probably about 15 or 20 of these that our grandchildren will have. And this is the year, maybe in another one over here, thank you. There's one that has my daughter's wedding and our first grandchild's birth, and the pictures of those very moments. So they're pasted in regular paper instead of photo paper, which is too thick. And then I wrote in the journal, and then I saved room for a picture that I can put in there. So do you see what I mean? It's an illuminated journal, and it's a really good way to memorialize meaning in your life. But they're fragile, and there's only one of those. So time has been progressing, and there's all sorts of things that have come up. Now, most of us, when we travel, we really are experiencing meaning. We're very present. We're in a new city every day, perhaps if we're on a cruise ship. We're taking trips, we're into new restaurants, and maybe we will actually create some kind of a photo legacy about that with some writing in it. So I'll show you one that I did maybe, I guess it was 2010. This came off my first Mac, and it's London to Petersburg, June 2010. This is so easy to create because they have templates that you just slide pictures into, and then it has places that you can write, and it's absolutely exquisite. Here's Ted taking a picture of the sunset, and there was a place in the Hermitage Museum where I bought a stamp book, just things that I thought were beautiful. This is out the window of a bus as we're traveling in Holland. The Little Mermaid, Sweden and all the places that we went. It was just, it's a precious thing to do. This is so simple to do. So like if we're on a safari Africa, we can preserve that, and it's pretty easy to do it. The most elaborate one I've ever seen, and it's really exciting, is This is Audrey Hepburn was somebody who did leave an amazing legacy. Doesn't she represent, she's an icon of grace and beauty, kindness, elegance. Her son participated in creating this, and it's really different. You can buy this used even if you want to on Amazon. But it has these pages in it, like this, that has, they're prints of all of her favorite mementos. Her family album when she was growing up and nearly starving to death during the war. And there's a letter from Cary Grant that's very, very personal to her, handwritten letters. And you can reach in and take these things out and actually hold them in your hand. So, I mean, I can imagine that somebody could take pieces of their life and create something like this. I'm just so glad. This is a Christmas party that she was part of. This is a treasure to look through and very motivating if you're thinking of leaving a legacy, to look through something like this. So are you getting some ideas of ways that you might think of memorializing things? So there's a theme emerging here of my own personal interest in legacy. And those of you who've been part of The Edge know that we are having an increasing number of speakers who really spark us on these subjects. I picked up a copy of Spirituality and Health magazine, and I saw that a woman in Seattle had written a book called The Forever Letter. And this is a time when this is last year. I mean, it seems like a long time ago, but I was working on a book called Expect Magic. And I believe that if we live in a energy of just expecting magic, of being open and receptive to whatever can happen in a moment, that we won't miss those opportunities, those amazing things that present themselves like the wild geese this morning. So I was walking into markets, and instead of thinking about my to-do list, I was really looking around and meeting the eyes of people. And I was noticing that people were getting sparked, and I was getting sparked back. That was the best. It was a really great exchange. And I started a group in the desert called Expect Magic, and it grew very rapidly and powerfully. And I announced at the beginning at the first meeting that the only purpose was to discover what would happen from us meeting all these interesting new people. And so I was just on fire with this subject. And so then at the same time, I was sharing with them certain things that were having meaning. So I shared with them the idea of the forever letter. The forever letter is where it's based on the ethical will of the Jewish tradition, where you write down for posterity, really, what you've found to be the most meaningful in your life, and what you wish for the future generations, and so on. And Elana Zaiman is the name of the woman. She's a rabbi, and she also is a chaplain, and she works in, old age homes, for lack of a better word, and helps people do these forever letters. Her father had written one for her when she was in her teens, and it deeply affected the rest of her life. In fact, it led to her whole life's work of helping people to think about what they want to say to their future generations. So luckily we flew her in, and remember, she was really inspiring and wonderful, and just amazing woman. And right after I discovered that book and started talking about it, you know who Carson Daly is? Well, he's the host of The Voice. I think he's also on the Today Show or whatever. But right after that, he posted something on Facebook that was extremely meaningful. His mother died suddenly. I knew her vaguely in the desert. She was part of a group called Women in Film and Television. Very vibrant woman, 5 years younger than me. And she suddenly died. And he was just brokenhearted, he and his sister. And they went to her desk drawer and opened the desk drawer, and right on the top of the pile in her desk drawer was a letter from her telling them how much she loved them. So that was a fabulous example of a forever letter, and something that they treasure more than anything that they have in their life, I'm sure. She was an amazing woman. But it was a wake-up call for me, too, because she's younger than I am, and I could be gone any second. And I finished. Debbie says finish the speech first. I'll try. I won't traumatize you by exiting right now. And put that on a suggestion card. I like that. And at the same time, I'd been working as a certified coach with people to expect magic and to figure out what really they want. You know, back in the old days, people would say, what do you want? What do you want? And they go, oh, I want a really successful career. I want a great marriage. All these things that they would say. And there was a process that we did at a training that was called the trapdoor question. What do we want in our lives? What do we really want in our lives? So they paired us up with I was with Paul in those days. And what do you want? So, of course, they gave us 2 hours to do this, and it really took a long time. I see Brooke nodding. He remembers this kind of process, but I recommend it for everybody. Because what do you want? Well, you think, well, I'd like to go to Europe, or I'd like this or that. And then they say, Well, when you have that, what will you have? So, yes, so I want a Lamborghini, okay? Now, that isn't really what I want, a Lamborghini, because, it costs $10,000 to change the oil or something. It's a big maintenance problem. I've just got another thing that I've got to take care of. But maybe what I want is, with the Lamborghini, is I want to feel successful. I want to be able to, it's a statement of what I've achieved in my life, or it looks cool. For different people, it could be different things. But you keep digging underneath that, and what do I want? What will I have when I get it? It gets deeper and deeper and deeper. So Paul and I, after 2 hours, something happened that they said would happen, that you knew that you are at the bottom. You have achieved, you found what you want. We realized that what we wanted, that was more important than anything, was shared love. Just that, just having shared love. And it was almost like we breathed this amazing sigh of relief to realize, and I do believe that that is the meaning of life. The love that we have shared in the world. And we can find it by identifying joy. Because what we want is a feeling. We don't want a thing, we want a feeling, we want feelings. With my clients, I ask them, what do you want in your relationship? What kind of feelings do you want in your relationship? What do you want to feel in your career? And so, in identifying the feelings, the highest feeling of all is joy. And that becomes a way of identifying what has been meaningful in your life. So we're looking for the moments of joy. I encourage you to think back on the moments of joy. At the same time, Ted and I were introduced, oh no, my goodness, this time is going so fast. We're introduced to something called end-of-life doula training. And a doula is somebody who usually helps people take care of babies when they're born, but there's something new that's way beyond hospice, where you work with people where a member of the family is dying. And you create deeply what they want that to feel like for their whole family, and what kind of a vigil scene that they want, what they want people to walk away having felt. And I could tell you numerous stories, like of a woman named Grace, who, for her vigil scene, it was her last days, she wanted somebody to come in and sit, the people who visited her, to sit in a chair by the door and to think about what had been meaningful in their relationship, the joy they'd shared in their lives. And after they had identified that, then to approach the bed. And there were certain rules about whether they could touch her or not. But she had assembled over on a table the things, the little mementos that meant something to her. And everybody was invited to take one of those things. So do you see that conscious closure can be one of the best possible things that we can think about? There are even bed and breakfasts springing up that are just for people whose families are going through loss, and that people can come from all over the country to be there and to have a very conscious time. And it was just about this time, as I'm giving all this so much thought, that I went to one of my Women in Film meetings. I almost didn't go that morning because, you know how you get lazy sometimes? Well, you know, what's in it for me to be? But anyway, I got myself over there, and I walked in, and it was at Smoke Tree Ranch. We were hearing about the ranch and its legacy, and a woman in the back of the room asked a question, and I turned around to look at her. And you met her, actually, a few weeks ago. Her name is Kate Zena. She's a gorgeous actress and a producer, director. And anyway, she asked a question, and I turned around and looked at her, and it was like, oh my goodness, I know this woman. Do you have those? When you first meet somebody, you feel like there's a deep connection right away. So we went to lunch, and it was one of those crazy lunches where you just talk forever. You just went on and on. It was like a soul sister meeting. And we enjoyed each other so much that we decided to get David Wolf, her wonderful business partner, and my husband Ted together at Smoke Tree Ranch for lunch. And during this lunch, David kept looking at me. We were talking about things that we'd done. And he was, it was kind of odd, really. He was just looking and looking. And then the next day, I think I got an email from him saying, I have an idea. Will you come to my office and we can talk? And he said, I just feel that there's something I really want you to know about. So would you play the clip here for me? This is a little bit of a clip. There's something
so many
now called,
things.
okay.
A family, a company built, a body of work, a championship team, or a marriage. Lessons learned over a lifetime to be passed down, or thank yous to be communicated up before it's too late. A Xena Wolf legacy film is a movie that celebrates accomplishments, that shares the stories of a life well lived. Many people are afraid that in today's cluttered and fast-paced world, the lessons of their life will be lost, never to be valued by the next generation, forgotten. But everybody of any age will watch a movie. Most people would never dream of having a movie made about their life and what they have created. If not now, when? Xena Wolf Legacy Films. Share your stories.
You can spend money on things, but memories, especially as you get older, are the most important thing you have.
This is a family in Pasadena who 4 of the 5 siblings are still alive. And they wanted to be able to capture the energy, the thoughts, the memories. And that film runs for 3.5 hours. If you can imagine, they talked about their dad and their first memories of their dad, and they forgot that the cameras were there. They were just so present in in experiencing it. It was just a great, great experience. And I didn't realize until David told me that this kind of thing didn't exist until now. We have all this digitizing. I interviewed my mother back when she was almost 90 years old. It's a very tragic looking video because of the quality of it. But now the digitization is so great. And people think, well, I can't be in front of cameras like that. I wouldn't know what to say. But the truth is you get lost in the moment. And I want to say something here about perfection. Perfection sucks. Write that down. I learned this the hardest way because Poe and I had a television show. We had 4 cameras. We had a crew of 40 at KCET. And we were doing cooking. And cooking is fraught with disaster, right? But anyway, I wanted to be so perfect, so I kept saying, no, let's do that again, stop the camera. And the director came up with me and was very, very firm. He said, Diana, it is not your job to stop the camera. I stop the camera. You just keep going no matter what happens. Well, and they kept trying to remind me not to be perfect, not to try to be perfect. So I remember one classic morning that's actually pretty world famous. Everything went wrong. Everything. Paul dropped an egg on the counter. Somebody had given me a pan that hadn't been seasoned to make a crepe in. And has to be seasoned to get the crepe out of the pan, right? To sort of slide out. I knew the instant I saw that batter go in that this crepe was never coming out of this pan. So I just kept powering through. I just kept, I did the best. And I said, well, you really need a seasoned pan. I was beginning to laugh about it, And then I walked over to one side of the kitchen, walked back, and the stove was on fire. I said, oh, nice fire we have going there. Went over to the oven, got my thing. We finished this thing up. Well, I looked, the crew was... Tears were rolling down. It was one of those hysterical moments. And so I said, okay, so we're going to do that over, right? He said, no, that was the best thing I ever saw. And our show was seen in all sorts of places. Ted and I got off a plane in Costa Rica, and we were swarmed. People were talking. We loved it when the stove caught on fire. Perfection is not where it lies. And so I'm looking at people in this room and thinking about legacy projects that they could create. Jane Drew, for instance, recently did a auction item where she went with Tracy and they went to a ranch. And I guess it was kind of like Jackson Pollock. They threw paint on the canvases. And she discovered an artist in herself that she never knew was there. And when I look at Jane now, since that experience, I can feel this quiet joy inside of her that is something completely new. And she found out she was very good at painting, and she's enjoying that now. So if she would sit down and do some kind of telling us about it, it doesn't work to sit in front of your computer and just, do photo booth or something, because, there's no relationship going there. But there's actually, for your phone, there's a little microphone that has 2 microphones that goes into your phone, and you can put it on a tripod, and you could sit with one of your really good friends and tell her or have her interview you or him about this experience of yours. And this would actually serve several purposes, because it would be meaningful for you, and it will be meaningful for anybody, actually, because somebody in their 70s discovers a new hidden depth in themselves that they get to express now. I mean, that's a huge message for the world. And years from now, even at your memorial service, they could show that one clip, and it would be great. It would just be great. My friend Debbie, I already told you, wrote a book. That's her legacy. For a major legacy film, I'm thinking of Ray, of course. He comes to mind because there are so many stories there. He has a gala for us every year. And for this fantastic musical gala, he flies in the caterer sometimes. And the most important person he flies in is his 92-year-old brother. Now, this 92-year-old brother, he didn't know he had until he was in his 50s, were you? 40s. His 40s. His brother's way older than he is. His father also, I think there were several brothers, were there actually, that nobody knew about because his father had a history that he hadn't bothered to leave as a legacy for people. But what happens at that gala is that this brother had an amazing history in music. He's a songwriter, a fabulous musician. He has a daughter who's a wonderful singer, and so we're entertained that way. But at the last gala, the brother's telling stories about how he actually recorded with Patsy Cline and Johnny Cash. And that moment I was thinking, why aren't there cameras here in this room telling this story? Because I can see 30 years from the future where Ray has a great-great-great-grandchild, and he's telling his friend, I had this really cool great-great-great-grandfather. He was amazing. He had businesses in every state. But you know what he did? He had this brother that he didn't even know about and he had all these stories that he could tell about the very early days of country music. I can actually show you a film about that. Here, look. And he's got it on his camera, or it's on a link. There's just think, we don't know what our legacy is going to be, do we? We have no idea. I'm thinking of Tracy and her member spotlight in this very room. And she talked about her love of beauty and design. We had no idea. Any of us in that room, we didn't know about that. But she could show the story of that. She also has 4 sisters, or there's 4 sisters altogether. They can reminisce about time. She could do some kind of a legacy film that would be a surprise for her husband. I'm just so full of ideas, I have spent my life doing storytelling. I learned I was the first co-author in the Chicken Soup for the Soul cookbook, and I had to learn very quickly to do that kind of story, and they have an emotional impact. They make you laugh or cry, these stories, and when I ever talk to people, I'm kind of putting their stories together in my head. I want to tell you about what I think is the most fantastic legacy film I've ever seen. Have you seen the new Mamma Mia movie? Oh, a lot of people in the room have. Well, the main character, Donna, who was played by Meryl Streep. she doesn't, this is not a spoiler, she's not alive anymore at the beginning of this film. And, but she lives in that there's flashbacks to who she was when she was quite young and how she discovered this Greek island. She went off after graduating from school. She met 3 different men, any of whom could have been the father of the daughter who was born in the last movie. So things are continuing on, but she's not here to see. And what happens in that film is that you see the impact that that woman's love for travel and building a hotel had on all the people in the film, even Cher, who shows up in a helicopter. I mean, it is so great. But it's the last 10 minutes of the film that are so meaningful. And I won't spoil it for you in any way. But Ted and I are watching this movie. We've actually watched it twice because it's so great. In the last 10 minutes of the film, we had tears of joy pouring down our face because they did the most amazing job of making you feel the true legacy of this woman, which she will never know. Just consider that. I'm just going to close with a poem. Some of you know that after I had a heart attack in '09, that I had to do a lot of walking, and I had decided to memorize a poem while I walked because it works really well. It goes into your bones. And the reason I'm sharing this poem is because of the last 4 words. Feast on your life. And this poem is by Derek Walcott. It's called Love After Love. The time will come when you will greet yourself arriving at your own door, in your own mirror, and each will smile at the other's welcome and say, sit here, eat. You will love again the stranger who was yourself. Give wine, give bread, give back your heart to itself, to the stranger who has loved you all your life, who you ignored for another, who knows you by heart. Take down the love letters from the bookshelf, the photographs, the desperate notes. Peel your own image from the mirror. Feast on your life. That's what happens when you use joy as your compass and you identify those pieces. So when you memorialize just one piece, I promise you it's going to lead to another. And then another. And what happens, you'll see a piece here, you'll see a piece there, another piece over here, and you begin to see that it almost has a life of its own. That these pieces want to be joined together in some way. And as you continue thinking about those things, it's almost like there's a patchwork quilt that could be filled in. So I think this is the most valuable work that any of us can do, is to mine the meaning of our lives through those moments, those meaningful things. It might be time with a child. It might be just talking about a memory. It can be anything that you want, any way that you want to memorialize it. But there are ways to do that now. I'd love to talk to you about them. You'll create your very own ending for this talk today. But I leave you with a couple of questions. How can what I've loved and learned endure? As I look back on my life, using joy as my compass, will I discover in myself hidden beauty that has been hidden up until now? Will sharing what I've learned spark future generations? Do I have an obligation to do this? I think so. I'm really begging you to do this. And I want to hear about the effect of this today. I want to hear about ideas that came to you. I'd love to give you any information that I have. And I encourage you to talk to me. If you're interested in legacy films, talk to my beautiful friend David. And I thank you with all my heart for all the years and for all the memories and all the joys and all the beauty that you've been in my life. Thank you. I'm hugging all of you.